So, Dave, what's the upshot of all of this then?
Right. So I'm going to quote Wenham here from the very last two sentences of the book. The Christian is fully justified in accepting anything that is written in these Gospels until it is proved beyond reasonable doubt to be in error. It confirms the right of the Christian Church to maintain its traditional stance with regard to the foundation documents of the faith without impairing its integrity. And for that, we should be thankful indeed.
Welcome to the Ad Nauseam Podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 203 of the Ad Nauseam Podcast. My name is Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. I stumbled on my own name there.
That's okay.
Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle.
You're a professional.
That's right.
You can do it.
So we're not even going to cut that out and splice it. No way.
No, it gives a stamp of authenticity.
That's what it is. That's what it is. Well, I'm down here in Parnassus Central, Vomitorium Central, Parnassus.
Right.
In general.
That's right.
And I'm down here with my good friend and excellent co-host, Dr. David C. Noe. How you feeling, Dave?
I'm doing pretty well. We have turned the corner now into the 3rd century.
Yes.
And though
yes.
we're only at 203, I can already anticipate 300 is just around the bend.
Are you already thinking about what we're going to do for the 300?
Yeah, the next clip show. Because the 200, didn't do so great.
Yeah.
But that's all right. We got some loyal listeners out there. We're very grateful to have them.
Indeed.
We got dumped on with snow this week.
Yeah, man.
The snowpocalypse or something.
We did, yes. I on my way over here, I encountered the abdominal snowman.
Did you really?
He tried to sideline me to get me to do some crunches.
Wow.
That's why I was a little late.
I ran into Sasquatch as well. Take off that Swiss chronometer.
Exactly. That hasn't been hip since 1984.
Exactly. Man. Did you ever have one?
I never had a Swaswatch.
I had one.
Swatch?
Be careful what you're saying there.
Yeah.
I had one briefly.
Did you really?
I got it at a thrift store. It was one of those that was transparent. You could see the inner workings.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. Did you get this after its heyday?
Oh yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I was very hip, but momentarily, which is the story of my life. 10 years after the fact.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today, Winkle?
We are doing part 3 of 3 parts on Mr. Wenham's fabulous book.
And that's a promise, right?
That is a promise.
We are not going to have a 4th episode on this book.
No, we are going to get through this. We're going to get to the end.
That's right.
No matter what happens. And
right.
If we have to leave things off, then we're just going to call it and move on.
That's right. Redating Matthew, Mark, and Luke. A fresh assault on the synoptic problem by John Wenham.
Yes.
Now it's a seasonal time of the year,
it is.
Right?
Yep.
So the Christmas season, as we say, time of peppermint is upon us.
I'm a peppermint.
Right?
Yes. Okay.
We have left behind the pumpkin spice.
Yes. Okay.
And going into the peppermint and so forth, wintergreen era.
Yeah.
And so the Gospels, right?
Yeah.
We want to know, when were they written? Who wrote them? Are they reliable? What's the relationship between them?
Yep.
And this fabulous scholar, John Wenham, an Anglican, has given us this excellent book from 1991, A Fresh Assault on the Synoptic Problem.
Yes.
Now, you're ready for this because your blue booking and your exam administering is all done?
It is not done.
What?
I'm about 3/4 of the way through my giant piles that are kind of looming and threatening to fall over on me in my office.
Now, do you use a red pen for your grading?
I do use a red pen, and with finals,
yes,
it is so rare for a student to kind of come back and pick up.
Right.
Their paper. Their
so
final.
you could just assign any grades you want, and you wouldn't have to worry about
it. Exactly. I could use a crayon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it does make it an easier kind of grading.
Yes.
Than the midterm. And
now, are these subjective or objective kinds of evaluations? By which I mean, are you compelled to give students the grades they actually earned because it's objective, or can you just hand out grades based on whether or not you like the student?
That's usually what it comes to. I usually kind of grade based on smell.
Yes. You're an olfactory grader?
I am an olfactory grader.
Nice. Yeah. People say I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner. I'm a textile grader. What does this feel like? Tactile.
It's almost like a Braille approach.
That's correct. Right. This feels to me like a solid F.
Yeah. I did get an exam I looked at this morning, and it was completely empty. Except for just one line at the top. It was it said, "Hey, Professor Winkle, I don't remember anything, but I loved your class anyway."
Oh, sweet.
And that was it.
The student got an A, right?
Yeah.
You got to give him an A.
I gave it a sniff. And
I like it. I love that meme that goes around from time to time, smart answers on tests. And there's the one where there's this elaborate algebra problem and the instructions are find X.
That's right.
Have you seen this?
It's just like,
the student circles it. There it is.
There it is.
Yeah. But I love a student who's honest like that.
Yes.
Hey, Professor Winkle,
Yep.
I don't remember anything, but I loved your class.
It's hard. It was because this was a kid
Okay.
that showed up every class.
Amazing.
Always had something to say. It wasn't always the most erudite thing, but he was into it. He was passionate about it. But when it came to like writing tests and stuff, just did not have it.
So one thing that tells me is not that there's anything wrong with the system in terms of we should change the grading or the evaluation, because I wouldn't argue for that. I think that the lesson to be drawn from that is there are people who like the material and are really benefiting from it, but who are not going to be scholars really under any circumstances.
Totally.
So why try to shoehorn them into that?
Right. Exactly. No, yeah, it's frustrating. It's kind of those are the kind of kids that fall through that gap, right? And but I think about this kid with all of his enthusiasm and zest for life, and I think he's going to find his place.
Exactly.
Right. That will take you places.
That's right.
Yeah.
And someday he'll look back and he'll say, when he's running a Fortune 500 company or something, I had this fellow Winkle as was it Myth?
It was Myth, yeah.
Who was my Myth instructor, and I love that guy.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that guy.
Gave me an F.
Gave me an F. The best F I ever got.
That's right.
All right. So, Jeff, catch us up to speed here. We've had 2 previous episodes on Wenham. The first one was chapters 1 through 5, which was internal evidence.
Yes.
And then the last episode, where were we on that?
Well, we were going through some of the kind of the particulars of I think we end up kind of the dating of Mark's gospel,
right?
Making some of his Wenham is making some of his chronological arguments of radical redating them according to the general accepted sequence.
Right.
Yep.
So we covered chapters 5 through 7, if I'm not mistaken, which was external evidence. So we looked at this guy Papias, right?
Yeah.
As he appears in Eusebius, and what does he mean by this Hebraia di dialecto?
Right.
Right. Was Matthew written in the an Aramaic or Hebrew language, or was it really a matter of style?
Right. Exactly. Right. So and we're reminded that Wenham, compared to most scholars on this question, takes the patristic evidence much more seriously.
Yes.
And takes them not at their word. I mean, he's just not.
No, he's a critical scholar.
He's a critical scholar, but he is saying that the patristic view, that the order of the Gospels in which they're presented, Matthew, Mark, and Luke,
right,
that is also the chronological order in which they were written.
Right.
And that's largely rejected by the larger scholarly community.
Yeah, the consensus. So he's challenging 2 items then, Wenham is. The first is Markan priority.
Yep.
And the other is the reliance of Matthew and Luke on the so-called Q or Quelle document.
Right.
Which Wenham says, this did not exist. And one of the most telling pieces of evidence to my mind from the previous episode, listener, if you haven't heard it, we suggest you go catch up. But the most telling pieces of evidence is this. Why was this first gospel, Matthew, associated with this fairly anonymous apostle if he were not the author, right?
Right.
What explains selecting Matthew, who has so little biographical information in any of the gospels, selecting him as the author of the book if he were not the author? Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting and quite persuasive. Right. So Wenham makes much of the tradition. Well, it's in the Gospels that Matthew Levi is a tax collector.
That's right.
And makes much of the idea that he was probably compared to the other disciples much more educated.
Right.
Fluent in Hebrew and as well as in Greek, both orally and in terms of what he was able to write.
And quite possibly Latin, although Wenham doesn't make this point.
Right.
If I may interrupt, because Matthew is interacting with Roman authorities.
Yes.
Constantly.
Right.
So probably knew a fair amount of Latin. He's keeping extensive accounting records of who owes what and who has paid what from what particular province and so forth.
Yeah.
And so this prepares Matthew well, maybe not to be a storyteller necessarily, but to record all the events.
A note taker.
Exactly.
Right.
Of Christ's life.
Yeah. Really, really interesting. And so in these last few chapters then, we get into more particulars about again, dating Mark's gospel, but then he also chapters on dating both Matthew and Luke as
That's
well.
right.
Yep.
We also dealt just a little bit last time as well with the question of Peter. Was he in Rome? When was he in Rome? What's his relationship to Mark? And we had this great quote. I don't think it was Wenham himself. He was quoting from another scholar, but he described Luke as a catechist. Sorry, not Luke. Mark as a catechist. That is someone who was probably traveling with Peter.
Yes.
And as Peter gave sermons on various occasions, remembering the life of Christ and what he witnessed, Mark is there learning the standard pattern of Peter's sermon in a kind of catechetical way.
Yes.
So then when it comes time to commit this to writing, that largely explains the episodic nature of the second gospel, right? It doesn't have a clear through narrative other than the very beginning with the John the Baptist stuff and the passion, death, and resurrection at the end.
Right.
But the in between, we said it's not exactly stream of consciousness, but it seems like it's presented in the order in which it occurred to Peter.
Right. Exactly. Very well said. I think before we dive in, just for the sake of our listeners who perhaps are jumping in and want to continue with the episode, it's worth reviewing the so-called two-source hypothesis.
Yes, let's get that.
Right. So the two-source hypothesis is the most widely accepted scholarly solution to the synoptic problem. That is, what is the relationship between Matthew, Mark, and Luke? And this hypothesis suggests that, one, the Gospel of Mark was written first, Mark in priority.
Right.
And second, that the authors of Matthew and Luke independently used two main sources. They both relied on Mark, but then on also this hypothetical Q document, which may have been written or just kind of an oral tradition that was out there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Quelle means, it's a German word for source. Right?
Yep.
So Quelle, Forschungen, something like that, the source document hypothesis. And to go back 2 episodes, that was a wonderful summary, Jeff. The internal evidence suggested, I'm just trying to keep all this in my mind, right, because I want to be able to use it later.
Right.
The internal evidence raised the interesting question, how precisely would Luke have copied Mark? Right?
Right.
Is the idea that Luke was scrolling, because they didn't have codices at the time.
Right.
Was Luke rolling and unrolling the scroll of Mark and finding, okay, I'm gonna copy this sentence.
Right.
But here I'm going to change this little detail that Mark records in a way that doesn't really make sense in the context. Why change that particular detail?
Right.
An example would be the number of men whom Christ encountered among the tombs of the Gadarenes. Was it 1 man or 2 men, right? 2 demon-possessed men or 1 demon-possessed man?
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that critics have usually said, pointed to as indicating that the Gospels are not reliable.
Yes.
It's a kind of silly, right? Because one eyewitness talks about 2 men and the other talks about 1 man. It's a matter of selection. It doesn't seem to undercut the reliability at all.
Right. Yeah, agreed. And as we've also talked about in the previous 2 episodes, Wenham puts a lot more stock in the reliability of the oral tradition than most contemporarily, particularly secular scholars do.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because of a greater, I guess, appreciation for what persons could have committed to memory in a more oral culture. Where everything isn't so conveniently available and written down.
Right, exactly. All right, so Dave, in chapter 8, kind of continues the arguments along his dating Mark's gospel. And I'm trying to remember, around like mid-40s, how Wenham wants to say that Mark is written, and Matthew even earlier.
Maybe late 40s.
Late 40s? Okay.
The notion is that Peter went to Rome around 42, probably, after the last persecution of Herod, and Mark followed him. And so, after a few years of Peter preaching in Rome and its environs, I should say. Yeah. Then Mark decided to commit this to writing.
Yes. Exactly. So I thought there's this interesting part of this chapter where he talks about this Qumran fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes, exactly.
That was found. That Wenham is making the argument that it contains actually a passage from Mark.
Right.
And if we kind of follow the dating of that particular fragment, it points to an earlier publication of Mark than is usually accepted.
Right.
So can you read a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd like to begin with the chapter summary, actually.
Yeah.
One of the many brilliant things about this book, and again, if you are if you're listening to this and you are a serious student of the Gospels, and by the way, it's okay to be a casual student of many different things.
Yeah.
Right? If you're casual about some particular subject, it doesn't mean you don't care about it. It just means you don't have time to study everything.
Right.
So we have the distribution of labor, right? So I digress, but I'm not a serious student of Apuleius like you, but it doesn't mean I think Apuleius is unimportant.
Of course.
Anyway,
Yeah.
if you're a serious student of the Gospels, I encourage you to pick up this book because it's so well organized and argued. Wenham says, Coptic tradition makes the undistinguished Mark founder of the Church of Alexandria. This is clearly stated by Eusebius, beginning of 4th century, who gives the names of the bishops who succeeded Mark, also by the Apostolic Constitutions, it's another document, and by Epiphanius. P52 gives direct evidence of a church in Egypt early in the 2nd century. There is a whole decade in the 50s when Mark could have been evangelizing Egypt and Cyrenaica. The fragment 7Q5, recovered from Cave 7 at Qumran, which was sealed in the year 68, so that's an important date,
Yes.
is confidently claimed by O'Callaghan as from Mark 6:52. O'Callaghan answers two objections. A tav is read at one point where the ordinary text reads delta. I should say a tau, sorry. But this is a common trait in Egyptian biblical papyri. Epitane gain is missing, but this phrase is also missing in some Coptic manuscripts of Mark. This identification is a possibility which should be taken seriously. A further internal consideration is the argument of HDA Major, which sees in Mark reminiscences of Jesus by an eyewitness. This provides an easier explanation of Mark's characteristics than the postulation of literary genius. So a number of different things going on there that we should unpack as we get into this chapter.
Yeah.
But the main point I would say is that the tradition is unanimous. Mark founded the church in Alexandria. The chronology, such as we have it for the 1st century, allows for him to be there and still be the author of the gospel under Peter's supervision. And Cave 7 at Qumran has a papyrus, right, which shows a possible allusion to Mark chapter 6, verse 52.
All right, so this verse comes in the context of the disciples responding to Jesus walking on the water,
Right.
and they were completely amazed is the setup line, and then 6:52 kind of finishes the thought.
Okay.
All right, but first, you want to read that in Greek for us?
Yes, let me read verse 52. It goes like this. Ugar sunekan epi tois artois, al ein auton he cardia peporomene.
All right. So let me just back up one verse prior and read the English translation, which says, Then he climbed into the boat, he being Jesus, with them, and the wind died down. They, the disciples, were completely amazed. And here's where 52 picks up. For they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened.
Right.
And so the Qumran fragment seems to, as I understand it, it's not like crystal clear.
It's not a slam dunk.
It's not a slam dunk. But that fragment seems to be this passage.
Right.
Right.
And we should maybe read a little bit of verse 53 also because it contains the prepositional phrase epitane gain. And crossing over, kai dia perasantes, epitane gain, having passed over or crossing over to the land, they came to Gennesaret, Elthan es Gennesaret, kai prosor mistesan, and they drew to shore.
Yes.
So the argument that Wenham is advancing, relying upon this scholar O'Callaghan, is that this Qumran fragment of 68, which is when the caves were sealed, 68 AD,
Right.
contains a clear reference to Mark chapter 6, verse 52, which shows indisputably, if it is a reference, that Mark was written prior to that.
Right. And so the cave being sealed in 68 is not the date at which this would have been written. It's almost assuredly
Right.
much before that.
You
Right.
would have, the argument would have to be that it's much before it. I mean, 67, Mark wrote it in 67, and it's in a cave in Qumran a year later.
Yeah, no.
That kind of, once again, strains credulity.
Indeed. Yeah.
If I am making a spaghetti, right, or some kind of a lasagna, you name the pasta. What's your favorite pasta?
I like a good cavatappi.
Cavatappi?
Yeah.
Never heard of that. Is that like a ravioli?
It's kind of a twisty tubular pasta.
What about Alfredo? You like that?
I like a good
fettuccine.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you boil the noodles.
Yes.
You put them in a colander, and then
Right.
you strain them.
Yes.
Right, to get all the water out.
course.
So you're left with just the noodle. I can strain pasta, but credulity?
Forget about it.
This is not something I'm going to strain.
No,
Forget
no
about
way.
it.
Right.
Okay.
So I have to say, I love this kind of stuff when these very precise arguments
Right.
come from these tiny little scraps of papyri that are found out in the desert. I mean, that's pretty Indiana Jones.
Yep.
I love it.
So that's from the chapter summary of 8. And now if we go into the chapter, Wenham gives us this on page 177. It kind of expands on the encapsulation. He says, quote, "There is one further intriguing possible piece of external evidence which must not be overlooked. It is not often that a small fragment of biblical manuscript hits the headlines of the world's press. But on 16 March 1972, the Times of London on its front page carried a headline across 5 columns. Scroll fragments put accepted date of the Gospels in doubt.
Huh.
It referred to the article in Biblica, volume 53, 1972, by the eminent Jesuit papyrologist J. O'Callaghan, which reported the identifying of what the author believed to be a fragment of Mark 6:52 and following, which had come from Cave 7 at Qumran, which had been sealed in the year 68. There had been a long and unavailing attempt to find an Old Testament passage from which this fragment, known as 7Q5, might have come. The most conspicuous combination of letters in the manuscript was its 2 nus, an eta, and a sigma, and it was supposed that it represented some such word as agenesen, but no passage in the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, would fit. Then O'Callaghan recollected the passage in Mark 6:52 concerning Gennesaret, and to his astonishment he found that, apart from 2 queries, it seemed to him to fit. Not only did the 15 decipherable or partly decipherable letters seem to fit, but there was also a highly significant space, equivalent to nearly 3 letters, separating verses 52 and 53. In such manuscripts, there are normally no spaces between words, but verse 53 starts a new paragraph, and this indicated this is indicated in the fragment by the unusual gap. So then the concluding part. Armed with this totally unexpected clue, who would have dreamt of finding New Testament fragments as early as 68? O'Callaghan soon found it easy, tentatively, to identify several other possible New Testament fragments from the same cave.
Interesting. And in case our listeners are having trouble kind of picturing this,
right?
Even the fragment we're talking about is fragmented.
Oh, yes.
So it's not like this strip that has this whole verse printed out in full.
That's right.
O'Callaghan has to make judgments about space and distance between the missing letters to make this case. So,
that's right.
Which doesn't fully undercut his argument at all, but it is a very difficult thing when you're dealing with kind of fragments and putting them next to other fragments.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so Wenham will go on to develop this a little bit and say that O'Callaghan, the Jesuit papyrologist, defended his position in 17 subsequent articles.
Holy smokes.
Written mostly in Spanish.
Yeah.
And the 2 objections to his position have to do with the swapping of a tau for a delta in the participle in verse 53, which is diaperasantes. I read it earlier. That's the first one. The second objection is the omission of the prepositional phrase epitain gain. And O'Callaghan has an answer for this as well. We won't go into it, but Wenham's conclusion is, yes, 7Q5, this Qumran fragment, is from Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 52 and 53.
So interesting.
Right.
Yep.
Before we move to chapter 9, Jeff, can you summarize what we've learned from chapter 8?
Indeed. This is from page 182 from Wenham. He writes, to summarize, the ancient testimony indicates that Mark's gospel is substantially the teaching of Peter, and was the means by which that teaching was handed down to the church after his decease. It also seems to indicate that it was probably written before the apostles' death, quite possibly shortly after a stay in Rome by Peter from 42 to 44, and before Mark started on his missions with Paul and Barnabas. This agrees with the tentative conclusions reached in our study of the relation between Matthew and Mark in chapter 4, and is confirmed by internal characteristics.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
So that wraps up Mark for the most part.
Yep.
And where does chapter 9 go next?
It's titled Ancient Testimony to Luke's Gospel.
So we're moving on to Luke now.
Yes. Yep. In chapter 9,
right,
he tackles the question of where does Luke fall into
right.
this. And so in the overall structure, I believe that, so what I'm saying is Matthew first,
yep,
and then Mark, and then Luke.
Correct.
Right? So following the way that if you open up any New Testament, the order that they're presented in.
That's right. He's a traditionalist in that respect, but with what I would say are very good arguments.
Right.
So if we start on page 183, Wenham says, testimony is virtually universal that the author of the third gospel was Luke, the beloved physician and companion of Paul. Wenham then mentions the anti-Marcionite prologue. So Marcion was the heretic who denied the validity and suitability of the Old Testament for Christian churches. He said only New Testament.
Yeah.
So there's a prologue to the Gospel of Luke attached to it that was written against Marcion and his views. So says Wenham, the anti-Marcionite prologue says Luke was a Syrian from Antioch. He was a disciple of the apostles, unmarried, died at the age of 84, and wrote his gospel in Achaia, that is in Greece. Theophilus must have known the author's name, and it is unlikely to have been forgotten. Clement of Alexandria, to continue, says that, quote, those gospels were first written which include the genealogies. This would seem to mean that Luke and Matthew were written before Mark and John. This is the strongest argument in the Griesbach case, another scholar with another important position. For Clement is early, 150 to 215, and well-informed. Peabody's belief that this view was held by Augustine in later life seems ill-founded. Gamba, so here we have Wenham
piling up the
scholarly references.
Yes.
Gamba finds traces of the view in the Monarchian prologue to Mark and in the writing of Sedulius Scotus of the 9th century. This tradition, says Wenham, is not so strong as the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John tradition. That is, that Mark came after Matthew. So, in other words, Clement says Matthew and Luke were first, but the overwhelming tradition is no Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, just as in the given order, as you were saying.
Yes.
If it has to be explained away, it is perhaps easiest to assume, says Wenham, that Clement of Alexandria meant that Matthew was composed before Mark and Luke before John.
Yes. Okay.
The main points in the Griesbach and the two-document debate are then summarized. Then on the next page, Wenham gives a very quick sketch of what he's going to prove in this chapter. So this is page 184, and Jeff, I'd like to hear your interaction with this.
Yes.
So he says, first of all, when it comes to Luke, the first question is, who was its author? The second question, where does the gospel come in the sequence of the four? The ancient testimony to the authorship of the third gospel may be divided into three very unequal sections. Firstly, there are the testimonies which are universal, that it was Luke, or nearly universal, that it was a companion of Paul and the beloved physician. Secondly, there is a strongly supported tradition that he was, quote, the brother whose praise is in the gospel, which is the 2 Corinthians quote. And thirdly, there are those which are supported less widely, traditions, that he was one of the 70 mentioned in the Gospel of Luke who were sent out, that he was the unnamed disciple of the road to Emmaus.
Oh, wow. I never heard
one
that
of the
before.
two.
Yeah.
And the third, that he was actually Lucius of Cyrene, was another individual mentioned because of the commonality between the names Luke and Lucius.
Yeah.
That's the least supported of all these traditions, but Wenham is going to examine each of them in turn. Now, the 2 Corinthians chapter 8 evidence, which traditionally has been taken as a reference to Luke and the composition of his gospel,
right.
Wenham is going to put this off until a much later chapter, pages 230 and following. So we're going to have to leave that, but there are two really interesting points in this chapter that I think we should focus on momentarily.
All right.
The first is the universal patristic testimony to Luke's authorship. So here from page 184. The unanimous testimony of the early Christian writers attributes this gospel to Luke. This is found in Irenaeus of Lyon, the Muratorian fragment, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and in those who followed him, and is never disputed. They usually make clear that he was the companion of Paul. Now, after that, Wenham talks about the supposed medical language in the Gospel of Luke. You've probably heard this in sermons and other places. Luke does describe some of the illnesses and the miraculous healings in a way that's different than the other gospel writers.
Yeah.
But at least according to Wenham and the critics he cites, it's inconclusive.
Wenham doesn't use that as another hook for proving Lucan authorship.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Or that he is the same person as the glorious physician, the dear physician that Paul mentions in one of his letters.
Oh, okay, right.
So if he's referring to Luke, and Luke is a doctor, and the language in the Gospel of Luke is, exclusively or more precisely medical, then that's a good argument. Wenham says inconclusive.
Right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Lucan authorship and kind of nailing down kind of who Luke was and where he shows up is interesting. But my sense is that it's not an absolute need in terms of dating this gospel.
No, although it does help with the chronology because Luke appears midway through the Acts of the Apostles as Paul's traveling companion.
Right, right.
And so if he were, if he is the author of the gospel, it helps us put him in different places at different times.
True. Yep.
But the remarkable thing is that the authors of the four gospels never mention themselves at all.
Right.
It's unlike, Paul saying, I, Paul, an apostle, or, Peter or James or the other individuals. I know James is not attested, but
yeah.
It's really quite remarkable.
It is remarkable. I was reading, I think it was either an article about Wenham or something, a critique of Wenham, and the author was making the case that kind of questioning Mark's presence in Alexandria, and one of his pieces of his argument is that in Mark's gospel, he never alludes to Alexandria at all.
Right.
But from what you were just saying, that he doesn't mention his own name.
Right.
Right. If Luke wrote this in Greece, he doesn't make an open deal that he's writing from this particular location. That's not part of kind of how these things were done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a remarkable point. I should mention, I don't remember exactly how I put it, but when dealing with a high volume of information like this, it's easy to make slips, and we want to avoid, some things happening to us in terms of correspondence. So the letter of James does include a specific reference to the author in chapter 1, verse 1.
It does. Okay. All right.
But the second part from this chapter, before we move on to chapter 10, comes once again right at the end. So I'm hoping, Jeff, that you can summarize that for us.
So at the end of the chapter, Wenham writes, in the search for literary relationships to the most decisive question in this debate is likely to be the weight to be attached to patristic tradition. If it is considered worthless, the purely literary debate is likely to remain indecisive, insufficient to create a new consensus. If it is thought to be of weight, it is likely to tip the scale in favor of Matthean priority. Now that's really interesting. So he's saying, hey, if you just throw up your hands and say, well, these early church fathers can't be relied upon,
right?
Because we can't. They have this tradition, but we can't get beneath that particular surface.
Right.
He says, well, if you say if that's not enough for you, then okay, it's going to be indecisive.
Right.
But he's making the argument is that there's no good, solid, scholarly reason to doubt this tradition.
Right.
Right. And if you take it seriously,
at least as a whole, maybe you can doubt particulars of the tradition.
Right.
But not to reject it whole cloth.
Out of hand. Right. So he says if we do take it seriously, then that's another piece of evidence for Matthean priority.
Right.
Yep.
And everything that follows from that. So I think we should launch into chapter 10 here.
Yes.
Before we go to our break.
All right. So in this chapter, we learn how were the Gospels written? That's the question he's trying to answer.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And so it seems that Wenham relies on two particular arguments. He's saying, once again, a primacy of oral tradition.
Yep.
And gives that much more serious weight than scholars usually do, arguing that evangelists were drawing on eyewitness accounts, and these were communicated by early church witnesses, and it was solidified at quite an early point. And he's also arguing for an interdependence among the Gospels rather than a strict priority and reliance upon Mark. So in the two source hypothesis, the idea is that Matthew and Luke are relying on Mark as well as the mysterious Q.
Right. Well said. Right. So from the chapter summary on page 198, we could say, quoting Wenham, the early church was eager to pass on the words and deeds of Jesus both to Aramaic-speaking and Greek-speaking hearers. Learning was mostly by rote, but a rigid form of catechizing was not adopted. Written records were probably required quite early for a scattered church. The Apostle Matthew, as the first author, presumably put in writing what he and his colleagues were accustomed to teach to the stream of visitors who came to Jerusalem. His order was not entirely chronological, as he wished to put the Sermon on the Mount and the mission charge in the forefront of his book. Peter knew Matthew's gospel, either in a Semitic or Greek form, and it is Peter's teaching that Mark records. The physical difficulties of writing, and even more of adapting, a scroll are stressed. It is unlikely that one evangelist worked directly on the scroll of another. Ancient historians relied on their memories and the briefest of notes. Only very rarely did they attempt conflation, and that of the simplest kind. Mark probably wrote in the way that he and Peter were accustomed to teach, basing his order on Matthew, and possibly using Matthew in checking his final revision. Isn't that fascinating?
That's really interesting, yeah.
And finally, Luke probably wrote with a knowledge of the work of Matthew, a from-the-beginning eyewitness, and of Mark, a minister of the word, and as a result of long following the words and deeds of Jesus. Luke followed the order of Mark, making some omissions and a great number of additions, but keeping to his own normal form of words. He also makes small additions from Matthew. His gentle harmonizing tendency leaves the so-called Jericho discrepancy untouched, possibly because he was aware of 2 Jericho settlements. His geography regarding Samaria and Galilee seems to be sound. Other questions of harmony, for example, regarding the genealogies, are considered.
Right. Okay. A lot of stuff there.
A lot of material.
A lot of material there. But I would say, just to bring this back around to kind of the question of the oral tradition, these things that you were mentioning earlier about some of these discrepancies. Is it one man here or is it 2 men here, there? Rather than using it as evidence that we should just throw the whole thing out because they're unreliable, couldn't those things also be explained by a fairly secure but maybe slightly changeable oral tradition that could change the presence of one person or 2 people there at the tombs? And then the argument about interdependence, right? So that yes, there is some kind of reliance of Mark and on Luke, on Matthew, and kind of filling in the details. A lot of those the differences, the slight differences between them, aren't necessarily mistakes of copying, but rather are reliant on a fairly secure and well-known oral tradition that's already in place,
and deliberate choices based on his source material.
Right. So Wenham makes the argument that Matthew could date as early as 40,
right,
which would be 7 to 10 years after the resurrection of Jesus himself. But I mean, 7 to 10 years, enough time for an oral tradition to be fairly solidified.
Right,
I would say.
Not to mention the possibility that Matthew was taking notes while Christ, before his crucifixion and resurrection, that Matthew was jotting things down.
Right.
And the Goodspeed book, which I mentioned last time, deals with this notion of Matthew as an actual scribe of Christ during his earthly ministry.
Yes.
So this chapter is really nicely arranged. It has, first of all, the oral background. Then there are 3 consecutive sections: writing Matthew's gospel, writing Mark's gospel, then, as you might guess, writing Luke's gospel, and then that takes us to the end of the chapter.
Excellent. Well, speaking of the 2-source hypothesis,
right?
It's time for the ads.
Okay, let's do it. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the folks at Hackett Publishing. Jeff, who are these folks?
Oh, these are great folks. They have been in business as long as I've been alive, 55 years now. They have their offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Indianapolis, Indiana. They are a publishing company that has been keeping the flame alive, bringing the classics to the masses for such a long time in an affordable and attractive way. Love it.
Incredible. And thanks to the good folks at Hackett who so generously sponsor this podcast, we are giving away the complete works of Aristotle, a 2-volume set in a nice Smithsonian slip cover sort of collection. And you can win a copy.
How do our listeners go about doing that, though, Dave?
Well, as I included in last week's episode, a little bit of a link. I'll do that in this one as well. There's a QR code and a nice splashy promo that's circulating on the social medias.
Nice.
You upload that QR code, you click on it, whatever you do with a QR code. Are you a QR coder?
I've used them a few times. I'm not a huge QR.
Take a picture of it with your phone?
And then send you somewhere. Yeah.
Okay. And then just enter your name and other information at Hackett's website that's dedicated to this giveaway. And on January 9, we will select a winner.
Yes.
So no purchase necessary. All you have to do is be a fan of Ad Nauseam and live in the United States or Canada, and you could be the lucky winner.
Yeah, get this on your shelf, if only just to impress your friends.
Exactly. But even if you don't win, you can still purchase some excellent books from Hackett. Jeff, how could they do that?
They can go to hackettpublishing.com. HACKETT publishing.com. Scroll through their incredible catalog there. They've got stuff, of course, from the classics, but from all different areas in academia, philosophy, religion, you name it. Just take a look, find the books that you want, drop them into the little grocery satchel, and if you put in this coupon code, AN2025, that will get you 2 amazing things. That will get you free shipping and 20% off your entire order.
Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Ratio Coffee. These guys have been with us for a while as well,
Yes, 'tis the season to drink coffee.
Dave. Indeed. It's always the season to drink coffee,
Yes,
but
it is.
especially now.
That's right, because it's, at least where we live, it's kind of cool outside.
Exactly.
Frozen, bitter. But the coffee is neither frozen nor bitter.
It
right?
is not.
It's very tasty.
Yes. These days are short and they are dark and they're cold, but I still love getting up early in the morning because I know that all I have to do is go downstairs, push that one button on my Ratio 8 machine, and then within minutes I'm going to have a fantastic cup of coffee that's going to start my day in a fantastic fashion.
Have you brewed up any of that Uganda bean I brought you?
I've already burned all the way through it.
Wow.
Dave. Yeah.
Phenomenal coffee,
It
huh?
was fantastic.
And such a nice delivery when it comes through the Ratio 8 with
Of course.
its one push button.
Yep.
The Fibonacci shower head. You've got the metallic veins. There's the off-gassing. No Kindle brick. No scorch pad underneath. Just delicious coffee each and every time.
Yeah. Did you use your Ratio this morning, Dave?
I used the Ratio 4
All right.
with much joy. I have a new one, actually.
All right.
So to me, it's the Series 2. It's in a nice linen finish. It's beautiful. Fits my coffee and my kitchen, I mean to say. And it's a decor nicely and makes great coffee.
Yes. Check out one of these machines. You have the 4, which is the small kind of office
entry
desk
level.
Entry level.
Right.
Then you've got the kind of the middle child, the Ratio 6, which I had for a long time. Great machine. And then you have the flagship, which is the Ratio 8.
The Marsha Brady, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. So these are not cheap, but if you love coffee and you want to invest in your coffee game, you can't do better than Ratio.
5-year warranty, made to the highest and most exacting engineering and precision standards. So go to ratiocoffee.com/adnauseum. And then what is the coupon code, Jeff?
The coupon is ANRatio2025.
Okay, and what will that get them?
That will get them 10% off their entire order.
I think it's $20 off.
$20 off, sorry.
Their entire order.
There we go.
If you're very kind, you might get 10% off, but $20 off for sure. Jeff, are you ready for art that speaks to your experience?
I'm always ready.
Okay, then you're going to want to check out the work of my good friend Della Chelpka. Della Chelpka is a Tucson-based oil painter who captures the people, places, and moments you cherish with breathtaking detail. Just this week, Jeff, in the mail, I received from Della a beautiful painting.
You did?
Yes, it is called Sunny Side Up.
Oh, man.
It's a painting of an egg.
I would love to see it.
I'll show you after the program here. We finished recording. Beautiful. So realistic that, in fact, one of my family's members said, "This creeps me out." What do you mean creeps you out? How can an egg creep you out? It's so realistic.
Yeah.
So, wow, it's incredible. But like all good painting, it's not photographic. It's an interpretation.
Yes.
This is something I've grown to appreciate a little bit more over time, I think. Like if we had a portrait done of you, Jeff, it's so much better than a photo because it would bring out your true character and identity.
Yeah, right.
You ever sat for a portrait?
Never.
Okay. It would be better than Sunny Side Up, let me tell you.
Excellent. Yes. So if I wanted to get one of Della's wonderful works of art, how should I go about doing that?
You should go to dellachelpka.art, DELLACHELPKA.art. Browse the gallery. It's a beautifully designed website. Not only did I receive Sunny Side Up, but I got a lovely thank you card with a tiger that she had painted.
Fantastic.
Also astounding.
Yes.
See what she has in her gallery. Put a couple of paintings into your grocery bag. If you are listening to Ad Nauseam, right, then you are enjoying coffee, you're reading books. Why not beatify, right, sort of dress up the space in which you do these things with some lovely art from Della. Then they have to enter a coupon code.
Yes, and that coupon code is Apelles, APELLES.
Why?
Well, Apelles is arguably the most famous painter from antiquity.
Very nice.
A favorite of Alexander the Great himself.
Wow.
And so that's the way of kind of us bringing Della's modern art and our ancient interest together.
Yeah, but not modern in a cubist
No,
just contemporary.
Contemporary, that's a better word.
But beautiful.
Yeah.
And then what will that get them?
That'll get them 10% off their entire order.
Check it out.
Dave, these chapters are about kind of how the Gospels were written. So share something from Wenham. Like how did Matthew write his Gospel?
So this is from page 202, and Wenham says, having this material on papyrus sheets, referring to the possibility that Matthew took notes while Christ was before his crucifixion, while he was alive then. Having this material on papyrus sheets, it would be the task of Matthew to decide finally in what order to arrange it. As he was reporting on a historical person, he would naturally lay out the matter in a broadly chronological order from the conception of Jesus to the final commissioning on the Galilean mountain. But as we have noticed, Matthew seems to have brought forward the Sermon on the Mount and mission of the 12 somewhat in order to emphasize the abiding importance of these great statements. His work, when completed, provided a magnificent handbook for those engaged in Christian work in the Jewish homeland. If the Semitic Matthew was translated into Greek before the writing of Mark, its form of words would probably have been much influenced by the Greek form of the early oral tradition.
Okay, you need to unpack that a little bit for me.
Okay.
Is he making the argument that the Greek translation would have been differently arranged than his?
No, but that the Hebrew form in which Matthew originally wrote it would have been translated into Greek at some point, perhaps by, maybe most likely by Matthew himself.
Okay.
And that, of course, the original composition and the translation would not be simultaneous, but maybe close together.
Okay.
But then as Matthew, if he is the translator, as he translated the Hebrew into Greek, he would likely have been influenced by the independent Greek oral tradition, which survived at the same time.
Gotcha. Yes.
And which you can see in Mark,
right?
For example.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, does he do a similar kind of thing with Luke?
Well, Mark first.
Mark first,
or I should say second, and then Luke.
Okay.
So let me read just some of the points of summary here, brilliantly put together by Wenham on the Gospel of Mark. So this is page 207. Mark thought out the broad outline of how he wanted to present the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is where Mark's fine and original mind laid its stamp upon the book that was to be. His intention was to write another account of Jesus on the lines pioneered by Matthew, but reflecting the manner and substance of Peter's missionary instruction in Rome. This was not to replace Matthew, says Wenham, but to provide the church with a second apostolic portrait of Jesus. He wished to take the main topics of Peter's preaching and weld them into a coherent story, emphasizing the cross and the cost of discipleship, and looking forward from the resurrection to the parousia, the return. Second point, he wrote in vellum notebooks or on separate sheets of papyrus or parchment his various recollections of Peter's teaching. Third point, he read through Matthew, making a table of its contents. Well, that's really interesting. Obviously somewhat speculative, but it fits Wenham's overall argument. Fourth, in this table he bracketed the items which were not part of Peter's regular teaching and which he did not intend to use. This list provided him a guide to the Matthew scroll and a preliminary guide to the contents of his new book. Point 5. He drew up a table of contents for the new book based on Matthew, but incorporating 3 changes of order. Then he refers us back to pages 101 and following, and the extra little items which he wished to include. Point 6. He arranged his sheets in this order. Point 7. He proceeded to read through Matthew again with a view to improving what he had written. He would not have worked in the spirit of one forestalling 20th century biblical critics, but would have been concerned with accurate and united apostolic testimony. Probably a large majority of his sheets were entirely satisfactory and were left untouched, but Matthew would occasionally suggest omissions to be remedied, possible misunderstandings to be corrected, or harmonizations to be effected. Hence there would be a gentle harmonizing influence operating, which may partially account for the closeness of sense of the 2 Gospels, Matthew and Mark. Point 8. Finally, Mark edited his revised drafts ready for professional copying.
Interesting. So he's if I can boil that down.
Right.
Mark, we could look at this as he's using Matthew, but it is kind of Matthew plus Peter's recollections.
Correct.
Together give us something,
right.
Something after Matthew, but also something new.
That's right. Yeah. Structure of Matthew, table of contents maybe, general order, but Peter's teaching.
Yes. And
the goal being, here is a quite deliberate self-conscious goal, according to Wenham's interpretation of, here is another portrait of Christ.
Yes.
Which, when you think about it, is really a remarkable thing to do.
Yeah.
It's to say, okay, I like Matthew, there's nothing wrong with it, it's good, but let's incorporate the things that Peter remembers after a certain amount of time has elapsed. Not much, though, if it's really between 42 and 44. It's a decade, but a little bit later than Matthew.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, what about Luke, then?
So I can summarize this in part by what he says on page 213, and the 2 Corinthians chapter 8 evidence still comes a little bit later.
Okay.
But we're going to get there. So he says, Wenham 213, the whole edifice or the structure of modern gospel criticism is based on the belief that the true Jesus is to be found by a critical elimination of those elements of the gospels which are not true, and by trying to make a careful distinction between historical event and theological interpretation. Great efforts are made to analyze the documents and to bring to light their inconsistencies. Harmonization is somehow regarded as the enemy of exegesis. Yet harmonization is a perfectly proper procedure for a historian who believes that he has reliable witnesses. And if our view of the method of the composition of the Gospels is right, harmonistic exegesis may in fact be quite in tune with the evangelist's own approach to one another.
All right, you're going to need to break that down. You're going to kind of smooth that out and put that in layman's terms.
All right, so if I understand correctly, Wenham is making a basic point about historiography. Two different historians describe some event. Like Jeff's arrival at the vomitorium today with all of its usual pomp and circumstance.
Yes.
So we have Sasquatch standing over on one corner, and we have the abdominal snowman on another corner, and they both witness Jeff pulling into the vomitorium to his special reserved parking spot. Now, a third individual, Lazy Steve, has the account of Sasquatch and abdominal snowman, and they are telling the story of Jeff's arrival from slightly... Are you bored with the metaphor?
No, keep going. I love it.
Slightly different perspectives. Jeff exits the vehicle. Jeff sloshes through the snow. So that's abdominal snowman. Sasquatch describes what you're wearing, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't talk about how you walk, that you kind of lumber along.
So much lumbering. He
describes what you're wearing. But then the other eyewitness, a third individual, I don't know... local Ron, he describes what you're driving, right?
Right.
So three different but not contradictory accounts of the same event. Which one is accurate?
Yes.
I think what he is saying, Wenham is saying, is that historians of all types regularly harmonize eyewitness testimony without sacrificing truth, because they realize that eyewitnesses are not simply going to be copying or parroting one another, because inevitably there's a question of perspective.
Good. Yeah.
And so he's saying that the harmonization that we see between the gospel writers, which is not extreme because some people still claim to find inconsistencies, the harmonization is in fact consistent both with historiographic method and with what the gospel writers may themselves have been intending to do.
Yeah.
To me, that's the really interesting part. That is, Luke read Matthew and Mark and said, okay, I'm going to tell the same story, but I'm going to stress some things that they don't mention. I'm not going to correct them, but I'm going to mention some other things because I also have eyewitness testimony in addition to Matthew and Mark.
Yes.
I've got someone else.
Yes. So rather than use these kind of inconsistencies as reason to just throw the whole thing out, when I'm saying quite the opposite. This is very common on how these things are done.
That's right. And I want to mention one more thing before we move into chapter 11. And that is a famous book by J. Gresham Machen called The Virgin Birth of Christ. And he advances the very traditional and I would say well-accepted argument that Luke's gospel was written sometime between 57 and 59. Mm-hmm. Wenham will deal with this, but between 57 and 59, the Apostle Paul was imprisoned in Palestine at Caesarea Philippi. And so the argument is that it was during this time that Luke made his tour of Palestine as Paul's companion while Paul was locked up. Uh-huh. And so he went and interviewed Christ's mother, Mary. For example, the infancy narrative in the Gospel of Luke is remarkable for its detail and kind of the inner psychology of Mary.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, there's a couple of different possibilities. One is Luke just made up what Mary was thinking, mm-hmm. right? It just invented it out of whole cloth.
Right.
As when it says in Luke's Gospel that she treasured these things up in her heart.
Yes.
Where would that come from? Well, is Luke just writing fiction? You know?
Right.
Or, to me, the better explanation is that he went and talked to these people.
Yes.
Elizabeth, John the Baptist's mother, Zechariah, or maybe persons close to them.
Yeah.
And then he took notes, and during that time, that's when he wrote the Gospel.
Yeah.
Very plausible.
Interesting. So that's 57 to 59.
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
So we're ready now for chapter 11, Jeff. Take us into it.
Yes, chapter 11 is titled Jesus' Tradition, Oral and Written.
Okay.
And he begins the chapter with a summary. Wenham writes, if the Gospels were written very early, which is Wenham's argument.
Right, throughout.
Why are they not referred to in the rest of the New Testament?
Good question.
This is a problem for all who maintain the substantial reliability of the Jesus tradition in the Synoptic Gospels. M.B. Thompson thinks that Paul could assume some knowledge of it on part of ordinary church members. Bultmann thought such knowledge minimal. Resch saw over 1,000 gospel allusions in the Pauline letters. Yet implicit appeals to dominical sayings are rare. This thinness of appeal to the Gospels persists into the sub-apostolic age, when the existence of the Gospels is no longer debatable. Luke, in Acts, having at least 24 chapters of Jesus' tradition in his mind, does not refer to it. Hebrew, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st John, and the Apocalypse all presuppose knowledge of the tradition. All right.
So could you lay that out a little bit for us? Parts of it I got, and they were quite clear to me.
Yes.
Other parts not. So this is Rudolf Bultmann, the famous German scholar.
Yes.
It's his position that Paul does not reference or allude to the Gospels in his letters anywhere.
Right. So he thought such knowledge of the tradition was minimal.
Okay.
Right?
And one argument is that Paul is relying upon ordinary church members to know the basic outlines of Jesus' life.
Yep.
So he doesn't need to repeat things that you might find in the Sermon on the Mount or so forth.
Exactly. And then, but to counter that, he mentions another scholar, Resch, R-E-S-C-H, who sees over 1,000 allusions to a solidified gospel in the Pauline letters.
Right. And then in the sub-apostolic era, which would mean the death of the last apostle, if we say it's John, maybe 90 A.D. or whatever the time is, the immediately following generation, the Gospels are there for sure.
They're there, yes.
But, says Wenham, they're not being referred to regularly?
Right. So this is the sticking point. So if Wenham's argument is right, that the Gospels were written very early, that Luke, the third of the Synoptics, is finished 59 at the latest,
yes,
then why are they not mentioned? Why does Paul isn't making specific reference to these written, circulating Gospels all the time?
Right. And Wenham's answer is basically going to be, well, there are some really solid potential indications in the Pauline letters.
Yes.
And I think the other answer is going to be that the writers of the different letters were not anticipating 20th century critics.
Right, right. I mean, Wenham also makes the case that so many of Paul's letters are written for specific churches about specific issues.
Right.
That that kind of everything being grounded in the original story, the original narrative, is not necessary.
Okay. That's very good. So take us through the chapter, if you could. I know that we're getting up against it here. Maybe just go to the conclusion at the end. A lot of the argumentation is excellent, but I'm especially interested on page 230 and following in the 2 Corinthians 8 material.
Now, the 2 Corinthians stuff, that's actually in the next chapter.
Oh, my mistake.
We'll get that. Probably, in some ways, a good way to finish. But let me just read a bit from the end of chapter 11 here.
Okay.
Wenham writes, these factors account for the paucity of references to the Gospels as manuals of instruction and show that in practice, reliance was placed for a long time on oral instruction than on written text. So once again, that primacy of the oral tradition. Only gradually did confidence in the process of oral transmission wane and the superiority of written apostolic traditions establish itself. This is common ground for all who uphold the substantial historicity of the Synoptic Gospels, whether they favor very early dates or not. So part of what he's saying is that just because Paul maybe isn't specifically referring to these Gospels doesn't mean that they, one, hadn't been written,
right,
and two, that they weren't circulating.
Correct.
So I mean, the questions about how quickly these written copies
right
could circulate is a very difficult one.
Yes.
A slow process, certainly compared to today.
Right.
And so when was this happening? Where was it happening?
Right.
These are all very difficult to establish.
So what are critics looking for? Do they want Paul to say in Galatians, as Mark writes in chapter 10 verse 11,
right.
I don't know what that is, but
right.
off the top of my head, I'm just picking a number. Is that what they're looking for? Would that constitute proof that Paul's audience had, in Galatia, had access to Mark's gospel?
Right. Right.
I guess they want something like that.
Yes.
So when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, he repeats a portion of what Christ says at the Last Supper, it is remarkably harmonious with the accounts of the Last Supper in the Gospels, but it's in different words.
Yes.
So a natural explanation is Paul was relying on the same tradition, but not in the words of the synoptists.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Specifically, if Luke had not been written yet.
Yeah.
Even if Matthew and Mark were.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, well said.
So does this prepare us then for chapter 12 and the denouement of the whole
chapter
thing?
Chapter 12, the last chapter, entitled When Were the Gospels Written?
Okay, so this is what we really want, right?
Yes.
This is what the people have been waiting for. Can you read us some of the chapter summary?
Yes, Wenham writes, on the face of it, the Synoptic Apocalypse makes a date before 70 probable for all three Gospels. There is no suggestion of Jesus' momentous prophecy having been fulfilled.
Okay.
The prophecy about the destruction of the...
Right, what Titus did, the son of Vespasian, right, when he invaded Jerusalem.
Yes. And now we get another kind of scholar dump here.
Nice.
Okay. Dodd argues that Luke's version of the Apocalypse reflects Old Testament prophecies rather than recent history. Hammers the book of Acts in the setting of Hellenistic history, makes a reconsideration of the 62 date of Acts necessary. Harnack moved from a post-70 date to 62. Bruce has moved in the opposite direction for insufficient reasons. One reason for discrediting Acts' history has been the supposed inconsistency of its portrait of Paul when compared with that derived from his epistles, and some have seen this as a reason for dating the book late.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's stupid.
I don't understand that at all. If I could just interrupt.
Yeah.
The critics that Wenham is citing, I'm sure he's going to disagree with them, is that Paul looks different in the Acts of the Apostles than he does in his own letters.
Yes.
And therefore, Acts is not reliable.
Right.
Let me ask, Jeff, do you think of yourself in the same way that your friends describe you?
Assuredly not.
Of course not.
Yeah, that's silly.
Yeah.
Yes. He goes on, much more decisive has been the supposed necessity of dating Luke's gospel and Mark before it well after 62. Luke and Acts are separate works. The former could have been written during Paul's imprisonment in Caesarea, as you were saying.
The 57 to 59.
But, and then here's what we've alluded to. 2 Corinthians 8:18 suggests an even earlier date.
Okay.
And he's quoting from the passage here. The brother whose fame in the gospel is throughout the churches is evidently Luke, and his fame derives from his gospel book. The use of Evangelion was expected any time after Mark 1 verse 1 had been written. It makes 55 the latest possible date for Luke.
Fascinating.
All right.
So when did Luke get all this eyewitness detail in the infancy narrative, and Simeon as well in the temple, and the prophetess Anna, which are part of Luke's gospel? These things are not in Matthew, Mark, or John.
Right.
So there's an infancy narrative in Matthew, but it's told from Joseph's perspective, not Mary's. So,
Right. Yeah.
But Wenham is saying 55 is the latest date.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
For Luke's composition.
So just to summarize, so he's arguing for Matthew somewhere around 40-ish.
Yes, maybe 38, 39.
Yeah, and he's arguing for Mark mid-late 40s.
Well, I think 42 to 44 is what he said.
So early 40s,
yes.
early to mid-40s, right?
That is, if Peter went to Rome in 42,
right,
sometime in the next 5 years probably.
Yes.
Based on Peter's preaching, Mark said, let's write this down.
Yes, and then Luke, 55.
Wow.
Radically earlier than most every other scholar.
This is like a fresh assault on the synoptic problem,
it's
you might say.
Almost as if it's what he's doing.
So what do you think about the 2 Corinthians 8 evidence?
Yeah, well, let's go to page 230.
Okay.
Wenham writes, a tradition, far from universal yet strongly supported in the early church, identifies Luke with the brother whose praise is in the gospel of 2 Corinthians 8:18, who carried Paul's letter from Macedonia to Corinth. According to Acts, Luke was present during the second missionary journey in about 49, when, in response to Paul's vision of the man of Macedonia calling for help, Luke tells us, immediately we sought to go. He accompanies Paul to Philippi, where Lydia is baptized and the slave girl is exorcised. Paul and Silas are briefly imprisoned, and the story continues in the third person as these two travel to Thessalonica, apparently leaving Luke behind in 49 or 50. Paul goes to Athens and to Corinth in Achaia, staying in the latter many days before paying a hasty visit to Palestine. All right, so he's saying Luke, he shows up in the book of Acts,
yep,
and he's Paul's companion during the second missionary journey, somewhere around 49.
That's right. Then he drops out.
Yes. So the question is, kind of getting back to this idea of why aren't the Gospels mentioned? When he says Luke is the brother whose praise is in the Gospel, as the one being sent along, and the church knows this very well. Is the Gospel that he's mentioning there this written account? already, or is it just a reference to the oral tradition?
Just kind of a general thing.
Right. Yeah.
And Wenham's argument is it is Luke.
It is Luke. Yes.
Based on all the patristic evidence and the chronological evidence that he has presented.
That's correct.
So this brings us right to the end, Jeff.
Yes.
And I think Wenham has put together a very nice list of all his conclusions in this quite comprehensive and densely argued book.
Yes, he kind of boils it all down with a kind of checklist.
Nice.
On page 243.
Let's hear them.
It says the argument of redating Matthew, Mark, and Luke has 8 major stages, and the evidence has been cumulative. Number 1, verbal synoptic likenesses and differences are best explained by independent use of the primitive form of oral instruction.
Okay.
2, genre and order are best explained by a literary relationship. 3, in particular, Luke knew Mark's gospel. 4, dates should be reckoned by working back from Acts, the natural date of which is 62. Number 5, Luke's gospel was apparently well known in the mid-50s. That's the 2 Corinthians passage, right? 6, according to tradition, Mark's gospel gives Peter's teaching in Rome. 7, Peter's first visit to Rome was probably between 42 and 44, and Mark's gospel was probably written about 45. And finally, 8, the universal tradition of the early church puts Matthew first, which means a date around 40.
Wow.
Yeah. What a really powerful, very intriguing pushback.
It's a well-argued book.
Yeah.
I'm very persuaded by it. I'd like to read something that he wrote on John now, although the Gospel of John is not controversial in the same way that the Synoptic Gospels are.
Right.
In fact, the only controversy about John that I'm aware of is... 2 controversies. When was it written?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Was it written before the fall of Jerusalem or after? And secondly, is the author of the gospel the same as the author of the Apocalypse?
Yes, exactly.
But that's for another episode.
Yes, indeed. But yeah, this was great. So thanks to you for putting this on my radar.
You're welcome.
This is really, really, really cool.
Fascinating read. So, but we have to get out of here because I guess the Cryptological Historiography Association is coming in.
Those cranks.
Yeah, Sasquatch, Abdominal Snowman.
Right, exactly.
Already, but not Yeti.
Yeah.
They want to record things, I guess, about your various trips and journeys.
Well, it could be that they're just chilly out there, and they're envious of your space heater.
That's right.
So, right. But at any rate, let's step aside.
Vacate, let them in. But before we go, we have to do a number of little housekeeping items.
Yep. So, Dave, our audience, we already know they love things all classical.
They might
want to learn some Latin and Greek, and you can help them.
I can. I would send them to latinperdiem.com, where they can find Moss Method for Greek. I'm teaching Greek students all over the world. It's a great privilege to be the one who introduces them to this beautiful language so that they can read Plato, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Homer, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And if they check out the work, they can see free lessons on the YouTube channel. They can also sign up for a course and use this coupon code.
I'm blanking on
what?
I know my
it's 10 plus.
10 plus.
10
right.
plus.
That's right. My catchphrases come later.
That's okay. That's right. 10% off your entire order
yes.
if you want to study Moss Method for Greek. We got Moffus hours tomorrow. I also have an introductory Latin program. I think really that my programs are a great value because of the combination of my expertise and experience and also a good price.
Yeah.
So that's how I try to promote them. Please
Fantastic.
Check them out.
Fantastic. Yes. Some thanks, Dave. Who do we got to thank?
I would like to thank Mishka, the wonderful sound engineer who not only helms this program, but she does a lot of other work for me, producing videos. She's the audio engineer for the Calvin's Latin Bible, which people should also check out.
Yeah.
Just a vast amount of learning available if you are an autodidact. Thank you, Mishka, for all your hard labors.
Yeah, and a special thanks to that wonderful guitarist, Jeff Sheets.
That's right.
He's the guy whose music you hear at the beginning and with the ads.
That's right. The thrill seeker,
yep.
right? The thrill of studying the ancients, as well as Rush Hour for the intro and the outro on the bumper music on the ads.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, love that guy. Wish I could play like him.
You just have to practice more.
I know. Hey,
for another century.
Hey, listeners, if you want to shout out, if you have a question, you got an idea for an episode, you have a complaint.
Oh, no.
You can write to Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget that V.
Or write to Jeff at adnauseum.com. There is a V in Navseum. You don't want to miss that one. And Jeff, what are we doing next week for episode number 204.
I believe we're going to go back to Mr. Maru.
One more Maru.
Maru, yep. And
right.
then hopefully maybe after that include something more topically seasonal.
Yeah,
right?
something a little bit Christmas themed.
Yes.
And I believe, Jeff, that we want to send our listeners once more to the Hackett website to find the Aristotle giveaway.
Yep.
Don't miss that. But you have the gustatory parting shot for today.
Yes, this comes from one Mr. Charles Carreau. Perrault,
I don't know.
Yeah.
On the American Road?
Right,
Isn't that his thing?
Exactly right.
What does he say?
And this quote comes directly from that. He writes, "You can find your way across this country using burger joints the way a navigator uses stars."
Oh, interesting. My burger joints have been a little sore lately.
Yours and I, but it's weather.
It's the humidity.
Yeah, lack of it.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.